All right, everyone. Thanks for joining this edition of the Zero to Hero Fireside Chat. Today, I have somebody very special, near and dear to my heart. His name's Ryan Libster. We worked together maybe like 10 years ago at Dropbox at this point. And he's since gone on to do amazing things. He was a sales leader at Slack for almost 4 years, then went on to Stripe, helping to shape their enterprise story, and now is head of sales for Claude for Work at Anthropic. So he's doing great things, extremely busy. He really doesn't have time for this interview, but he's graciously offered some of his time and is throwing me a bone. But Libster, Ryan, tell us about kind of you. I gave a little bit of a background, but in your own words, would love to learn about how you stumbled upon sales and a little bit of your progression from your point of view.
Totally. Yeah. Claude was in overdrive today, which created a little bit more time for me able to do this. So
Nice.
yeah, you went over the professional highlights. Stumbling into sales. It was actually right before Dropbox. So I had spent the beginning part of my career in finance. I graduated in the midst of the financial crisis, and there was not a whole lot of hiring to be done. And I think Google was probably the only company that came to Northwestern for like true recruiting.
Oh,
And
wow.
I worked at Northern Trust, and then I was at UBS. And my heart was never in it. And, I thought I wanted to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial and creative. Probably did not have the true chops to start my own company. I have like the utmost respect for founders. And I feel very lucky that I have worked at early stage companies to kind of see how the sausage is made. But yeah, I was in San Francisco working at UBS, had a lot of friends that were working at startups and just making more of an impact. So there was this cool opportunity at a company called Uversity, which was ed tech and kind of a combination of enrollment intelligence and social media. It was built on the Facebook platform. And they gave me a role, which was a business development function. So that was kind of like my first foray in sales.
Amazing. Actually, I didn't know that you were at university and that whole story. What got you into Dropbox then? Like, what was your connection? How did that start?
Well, my dad actually started using the product before I did. He wanted to share
Wow.
pictures and music, and I was like, all right, if my dad figured this thing out, then they must be onto something, and the UX and adoption needed to be there. But yeah, through a friend of a friend, Marianne Brown was, I think, originally in the sales team and then moved over to recruiting and people ops.
Yeah.
But she got me an interview and met the team, and I joined January 2014, like right when Dropbox for Business launched. Was very
Hmm.
much kind of prosumer, just entering the business enterprise world. I think you and like maybe two or three other people were there as reps. So yeah, it was early days.
Super early days. I think kind of what you said around your dad using Dropbox is pretty emblematic of how people figured out about Dropbox. It's like, oh yeah, like my family members use it to store photos, which also actually was a little bit of a headwind selling into enterprise, right? Because we were seen as a consumer brand. But nonetheless, you had a ton of success selling a lot of enterprise deals. So I don't know if you're able to mention some of the logos. I'm sure you can. I mean, a lot of them are publicly Dropbox customers, but how did you learn sales at Dropbox? And then we could start to talk about Slack, Stripe, and beyond, because Slack was a little bit more mature when you joined, I would say, and Stripe was as well, right, in the enterprise sense. So I'm,
Yep.
I'm curious, like, let's start with Dropbox. What was it like kind of going in there from university? I'm sure you learned like business chops there too, but um, yeah, any like specific scenarios, trainings that stood out to you that really helped when you went into the tech sales world?
So, well, I was lucky to learn from you, obviously. I think it just became clear that the stereotypical way of selling wasn't going to work, especially for a product like that, right? I think you really needed to genuinely connect with the people you were selling to, and some of the ways to do that were trying to speak their language, right? Like we went vertical at Dropbox, so when it came to like selling to media companies, it meant like understanding the other tools that they integrate with, like really trying to like put yourself in their shoes to understand the problems they're going through. You asked about a few logos. I mean, this is dating myself. I don't remember them like that crisply, but there was like MGM Studios, Macmillan. We got a land deal at Disney, which you were very involved with, and I think in all of those situations, it was an uphill battle because like usually weren't at feature parity to like a box or a Microsoft OneDrive, and then obviously you had to compete with perceived free. So yeah, almost combining like how do you relate to this company to understand what they're going through? Like, why would this person put their reputation at stake? Someone who's going to potentially champion this, where it's like very different than buying Salesforce or Oracle. This is not like an easy button. They're like probably putting themselves through a lot of risk to do it and giving them the
Yeah.
confidence that like the rest of your company has their back. So through executive alignment and then just kind of like working through what the change management is going to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you use the word reputation, and it's very personal in a lot of cases. I told you I spoke to Lenny at NBC Universal, and for him, it was very much a personal project as well, right? Because if he didn't have success with the project, there's like 20, 30 execs who are going to point the finger at him. So extremely high stakes for our buyers. I agree. How did you take sales training at Dropbox? Because I went through Sandler at Dropbox. I don't know if you went through like specific versions of that training or another training, because I think like various teams maybe had different flavors of training. So, yeah, where did you get your training? How did you learn, all of this in terms of like convincing the buyer early on? I'm not asking you to throw me a bone either. Like obviously I'm part of it. You don't have to be shy about that
This was
either.
before
But
Peter had the Peter on sales
it's not a leading
methodology.
question because
Yeah,
that was only a small part of your success at Dropbox. But kind of like I'm curious, like the journey, right? Like where did you pick and choose? Because there's a lot of different, I think, frameworks and structures that you probably use to form your own style of sale, right?
totally. I mean, on a serious note, we had that paper doc where we actually really were documenting what you were doing and trying to codify what Peter on sales looked like. Um, and it's something I still think about a lot, right? Like I don't have the perfect blueprint of like it has evolved a bunch. And I think um, at Dropbox, we definitely rallied behind the challenger sale. So it wasn't like a training that we did, but I remember like everyone was reading the book and it was very much how do you challenge the status quo, knowing that kind of like
Mm.
relationship style selling is only going to get you so far, but like really having the confidence to push people and kind of like take them to the next level. I did Sandler training as well, but it was at Slack. I actually never did it at Dropbox.
Okay, okay. Yeah, talk to us about that. Let's segue to Slack now, actually, too. And I love actually like one more thing about the Challenger sale. I like that because we had to convince people that you don't need Box's enterprise features, and there were like hundreds of features. I feel like every week their product marketing team was launching something, and then it all hit ahead when they came out with like encryption key management. I
Yeah,
remember that was like a
exactly.
huge thing. And then we had to tell buyers like, are you going to even use this thing? Right? Like the
Totally.
EKG feature. So I love that there's a lot of that going on. But anyways, let's go on to Slack because we didn't intersect that shit at Slack. I wish we did. What was that like kind of going into Sandler training with the base of experience from Dropbox? Like how did that impact your evolution in terms of your sales style?
Yeah, and it didn't happen for a bit. I think probably like maybe a year and a half or 2 years into my time at Slack, because when I joined, we didn't
Hmm.
overlap, but it was like fall of 2016. I think the company was like roughly 400 people, maybe like doing just north of 100 million in revenue, but Enterprise Grid hadn't even launched, so it was like most people were still account managers, right? It was
Hmm.
not like
Yeah.
kind of a true hunting or like, you have the whole account team based off of a customer type Salesforce model. Um, the Sandler training, I mean, look, there were a lot of parts of it that didn't stick for me. The one thing that like I still think about all the time from that training is the don't chase tennis balls. It's like
Hmm.
your time is the most valuable thing that you have as a seller. Um, in fact, I think you taught me this, right? Like you should go into any meeting like being fearful that you're going to waste your prospect's time. Generally, I
Yeah.
just think it like incentivizes the right behavior. But what they were teaching in the Sandler training was that you might get this security questionnaire of like 2,000 questions, and maybe it's coming from like a Nike. So it's screaming like, oh, this is an amazing opportunity with a great logo, but have you actually qualified it? Or like, is it a good use of your time to do this just because they're asking you to do it? So it's like
Totally.
kind of thinking critically about qualification at every part of a deal, especially when your team is like super strapped and probably doesn't have the resources to do it.
Yeah, like the power dynamics are huge, right? Because I think I wrote about this around being a puppy dog in sales is really dangerous, right? Because puppy dogs chase tennis balls, right? And
Totally.
what happens is when you go fetch the ball, the prospect throws it farther, right? So then you get into this rabbit hole of investing a ton of time. And all the while, the prospect's probably not leaning in to be like, here's your $1 million to close this deal with, right? So, yeah, I completely agree. It's something I talk about a lot. Like, don't chase the shiny logo. You mentioned, like, how did that kind of crystallize for you, like the tennis ball analogy? Like, were there certain deals where you were like, oh, okay, I see how this could have played out if I actually did fill out the questionnaire or if I actually did do XYZ tasks for like several hours? Like, were there specific instances where it kind of clicked for you?
Totally. I mean, I remember a deal, everyone has plenty where you just didn't spend your time in the right places. There was that one opportunity with a big fintech company called SS&C, and they were just like loading us, saying all the right things, right? Like, we'll
Mm,
have Stuart come by the office for an exec meeting and just giving off the like buying signals, but then throwing like a ton of paperwork, et cetera. And like we never really got to like the value behind, okay, is there going to be impact? And kind of like how are you actually thinking about rolling the product out? So Spidey sense should have been up more. But yeah, another learning from the don't chase tennis balls is that when you say no earlier in the sales cycle, then it just becomes easier to say no later on, right? Like nothing is probably worse than like you're like yes, 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 and then you get to the late stages of a commercial conversation, and then if the prospect hears no for the first time, then like you could be in trouble. It's almost like that you're coming at it from a place of respect, and it's like the give get
yeah,
equilibrium that you want when you're negotiating.
totally, totally. Yeah, it's so important because it's very psychological too. I would say sales, right? So it's a relationship. So there's a big emotional component to it. So you kind of need to train the other side that you can't say yes to everything. Super helpful. Let me go back to kind of what you said. You said there were a lot of things that didn't stick for you though in Sandler training. So why was that? Was it the delivery? Was it the, there's a lot of different components to sales training, right? So can you unpack that a little bit around like what components didn't stick and why?
It's a really good question. I think almost just like that out of touch with the product that we were selling. And
Hmm.
I mean, as you know, better than most, just a PLG motion is so different than kind of like true tops down enterprise selling. I think you generally are hiring different people, the way that you start a conversation, the way that you're like demonstrating value. There are parallels, but it's definitely not the same. And I felt I'm gonna like not be able to share specifics because it was so long ago, but just
Yeah,
like
of course.
generally the like structure of it was not as applicable to like, okay, you're talking to a company, they probably have pockets of usage there. Maybe there's like a more data driven way to run through this sales cycle versus kind of the things that were
Hmm.
happening with Sandler training.
Got it, got it. So there was not a lot of like, we know your Slack, we know this is what's happening. So here's how you morph the framework to Slack specifically, right? Or even like a PLG motion. Because Slack's motion is not like all that unique. Dropbox went through that too, right? So that's
Totally.
what I'm hearing. It's like they didn't just do the, maybe there wasn't the prep work to be like, okay, which organization are we actually training? Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes a ton of sense. How about let's go on to Stripe now, and then I want to shift a little bit to like how you enable your mentees too, and then you're also advising a lot of startups and looking at the startup landscape through Cowboy Ventures. So, but before that, let's go into Stripe. What was that like? How was the training structure there? How many reps were there? You were leading a section of the enterprise team. So can you just give us the context and like segue a little bit into training?
Yeah. So Stripe was much further along than Dropbox or Slack when I joined. I think maybe North America sales was like 250 people. The business was pretty mature. They were doing like a billion in revenue, and just such a different motion than I had seen. Right, like payments is a pretty wonky part of the economy, and um, just like very different when you're selling purely to developers in an API. You're basically like selling a project versus selling a product. So there's just
Hmm.
a whole lot more like delayed gratification, right? It's not like you sign a deal and like you can recognize that right away. It's like you sell the
Got
deal,
it.
but then you need to like enable the project, and then the incentive structure is great because the only time that Stripe makes money is when your customers make money. But it's just like a very different mindset, and in my opinion, just like less that you can control, right?
Hmm.
Compelling events are almost always going to be like based off of like your customer's product development cycle for the most part.
Makes sense. Yeah. And there's not
My
that like
team,
upfront cash, I guess. It's like based off the transaction volume, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
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 So I inherited I think like 4 or 5 AEs. This was on the digital native side of things. Stripe reorg basically every quarter, so that'd be a
Yeah. I
podcast
remember
in
you
itself
talking to
to
me about that.
yeah to
Yeah.
tell you about like all the different ways we tried to cut up the market. But the through line during my time there was almost all new business digital native sales, which was kind of like an arbitrary we came up with. Like if the company was founded after 1998, they were probably more cloud friendly, kind of like the
Hmm.
Etsy's of the world, larger companies that were doing more than $1 billion in run rate that were founded after 1998.
Got it. Got it. Very cool. And when you inherited those reps, was there training that they had gone through, or was there training you went through together? Like, how did that work in terms of enabling the Stripe way of selling? Like, what was that like?
So we did end up bringing on a consulting firm to do like a very custom sales enablement methodology
Hmm.
for Stripe. It was called S3. I think
Oh,
Amazon might have
interesting.
done something similar because Mike Clayville was CRO at Stripe, and he was running all of AWS
Got it.
prior.
Got it.
So he was
Got it.
reporting to Andy Jassy. Had like a ton of incredible experience running huge orgs. And yeah, when he came in, that was kind of like basically trying to put much more structure in the way that the team sold, and it was like fairly custom to payments and more of that like partnerships business development function.
Interesting. So since this was a little bit more custom, a little bit different than like the Sandler situation at Slack, it sounds like. How did the training go over with like your reps through, the chatter that you heard and also through talking to your peers on leadership? Like, was there a big impact on the sales force and the numbers?
No, even though it was custom, I would say the impact was like pretty meh, if anything, negative. And
I love that. I love that.
yeah, it was very
Okay.
like
Yeah.
a very expensive mistake.
Wow.
And
Okay.
probably because it was just like such a dramatic shift, right? Like you can imagine going from a world with like not having true sales compensation to like everything like, all at once, right?
Hmm.
So you had a lot of people that just were not accustomed to that kind of like pure hunting, eat what you kill, 50-50 between like your base and your variable, in addition to just a lot of change in the way that you were like qualifying and coming up with like detailed account plans. It was a lot to chew off. And I
Hmm.
think even though it was custom to Stripe, there wasn't like enough time spent from the trainers to understand like what the current state of the state was. And that's what led to kind of poor adoption of it.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounds like they maybe tried to boil the ocean a little bit where no, obviously in and of itself, account plans is a great thing. In and of itself, making sure salespeople are heavily commissioned is a good thing. But when you're trying to do everything at once, it's probably very difficult.
Totally.
Um, in spite of that, I'm sure you were like really leaning in to make sure you're training your own sales team. And you made my job super easy at Dropbox when you were on the media sales team, you and Mike Marg. I mean, I felt like I had two of the best reps in the org. So I appreciated it a ton, and it felt like more fun for me than like a management job, which is awesome. Um, so how did you kind of like train your reps at Stripe? Because you have this training, it's not enough. You have these reps who I don't know what their backgrounds were and how junior or senior they were, but maybe we can dive into that. Like, what is your management style and leadership style when you come into a position like when you're at Stripe and now as you're starting to hire at Anthropic?
Yeah, it's almost you want structure in place, but you don't want to like make it so limiting that people can't be themselves. So, I mean, some of this just seems so basic, right? But it's like setting the right structure up for a Monday morning call so everyone's aligned on like what they're going to do that week. And I'm like a little bit of a stickler of putting your goals in writing. So like I'll lead from the front too, right? So like anything I'm going to ask my team to do, I'm going to do it.
I love
So
that.
we'll share, and I still do this today. Like, what are you going to accomplish for the week? Put it in the Slack channel. There's visibility for everyone else to see it. Then during one-on-ones or at the end of the week, you just like do a look back and see like, did you actually have a productive week or not? I was really pushing the team to get into the field. Like it worked great for us at Dropbox, and I think there's no substitute for when you're selling larger deals that you need to build relationships with your customers, and you can probably outseat the competition by doing that.
For
So we
sure.
launched
Yeah.
this Slack channel called Tales from the Road. I've done this at a few of my previous spots, and it's cool to like get the rest of EPD on the journey that you're going on. So I'd
I
say that's
love
part
that.
of my process too, right? Is like you really want to make sure you're totally aligned with your cross-functional partners, and then kind of showing the fruits of their labor by in that channel. You drop in pictures when you're meeting with your customers in the field, share the
Yeah.
use cases, and it just like ends up being more fun, I would say, in the way you do it.
That's amazing. I love that too because sales is very educational for the rest of the company, especially in early stages. And so something like Tales of the Road, it's probably super fun for people to consume, but it's also educational, right? And the other thing I love about what you said is you actually embody what you're telling your team to do. I think that builds a ton of credibility, right? It's hard to tell people to do something and then you're like sitting there not following the structure either. So that's awesome. Really appreciate you sharing that. What about like let's talk about founder-led sales for a little bit too, because that's a lot of my clientele right now. Early stages, trying to figure out the positioning, the messaging, where the skeletons could be. How do you go up against like the Goliaths of the world, right? So what are some like kind of patterns you see with founders that you're looking at and vetting, on behalf of Cowboy Ventures, and any kind of words of advice for founders to, really digest and take forward with them when they're executing on the sales journey? Like what are some things that you think are important to understand in the founder-led sales game?
And just to clarify, it's kind of what to think about when you're going to be moving on from founder-led sales to bringing on a sales team, or just generally like even how they can be more successful.
Good question. Just generally, I think like how they can be in like the 0 to 1 journey, right? Even before because I feel like, once they get to the 1 million, like that becomes a little bit, more clear cut, I would say, although maybe not really when you're looking at the entire sales landscape and all the stereotypical salespeople out there, but just focusing on, landing your first 10 logos, like as a founder, or the first 5 or whatever that may be, like
Yeah.
what do you think is important to keep in mind? And I think there's parallels to how you've carried yourself in the sales role too. So I guess I'm saying like, what are tips and tricks that you found really work? And you've alluded to a lot of them already, but that you think is really important for like founders to understand in the early going so that they have a little bit of a head start.
I'd say it's being very focused on where you think you can win. So maybe that's a segment of the market in terms of employee size. Like, is your solution more for startups? Is it more for enterprise? Is there a vertical where you have conviction that like there's going to be better product market fit? Obviously, early days, sub $1 million ARR, you're kind of iterating, but you should definitely have that perspective. And then you're, looking at the data to see how long are the sales cycles taking, who's buying, what's the like qualitative feedback that you're getting in the field. And then, I mean, this is table stakes. It doesn't matter like what you're selling or who you're selling to. There needs to be the value conversation, and you should just be thinking about that from the beginning, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm about to do going to help this company make money? Is it going to help them save money or eliminate risk? Right? I feel like those
Mm-hmm.
are like basically the big pillars. And in a zero interest rate environment, when everything was going up to the right, you can get away with a lot of bad behavior and probably don't need to do that. And I've been lucky to be on that journey for a good part of it. But it's just like when you're selling larger deals, when things get tough, or you're like really trying to scale, you kind of need that to be a part of the process, or you're not going to have significant win rates.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, like you keep saying, it sounds obvious when you say it, but it's not obvious in the moment because so many like technical founders or product driven founders focused on the features of their product because they think that's where the explanation needs to happen. But actually, the explanation is around like, how are we actually going to help you high level, right? And it almost doesn't matter like the list of features, it matters like how the workflows actually provide value. So that's a really good reminder. Okay, last couple questions. Next question is, okay, now you're at Anthropic. It's one of the darlings of AI, I would say, right? There's a lot of interest, so many people just proactively writing about it. I don't know if you saw, but I mentioned you in a LinkedIn post where one of my clients said Claude was really good for like
Oh, really?
reasoning and writing. Yeah, yeah. So you look in your notifications. I know you don't have time to, but I
Nice.
commented. So I was gonna say there's a lot of tailwinds, but a lot of headwinds too, right? Because it's extremely noisy space. So how are you looking? It's fairly recent. How are you looking at like really winning the market? Um, because you can't chase every single logo or every single use case. So like what are you thinking in terms of like the next like 6 to 12 months at Anthropic specifically in terms of how you're gonna really get the sales engine going?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely parts of the strategy that I can share and parts that unfortunately I
Mm-hmm.
won't be able to.
Yeah, for
But
sure. Yeah.
I would say at a high level, it's like putting ourselves in a position where we can win, right? So for us, that's predominantly like selling to companies that hate Microsoft because you kind of see how this is taking shape where like we have
Mm,
amazing partnerships with Google and Amazon and OpenAI is tied at the hip with Microsoft. So with that,
mm-hmm.
we can actually get synergies with the companies we're selling to if they're aligned that way. And we definitely want to be our um, customers' preferred AI partner. It doesn't matter if they're going to be building with API or buying an out of the box solution like my team is looking after with Claude for Work. And I think because we're a bit more nimble, we can just come at it of like more of a partnership angle than
Mm-hmm.
some of the competition. And then look, it is early days. Like there's so much hype and excitement and like amazing use cases, but the devil's in the details for a lot of it. So it's like, where are the places where we can have like faster time to value, get really sticky adoption, and then a lot of that is also baked into like the product differentiation. So like as we continue to iterate, our enterprise product is actually launching next week. So with that,
Oh,
it's like,
nice.
how is it going to be much more personable and kind of like help you with prompting? So people who might like not be as familiar with AI, once they start using it, it's just kind of clear as day how they can make the most of Claude.
Yeah, yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, you're kind of like living your own advice with what you said there because you led with like more like qualification criteria on disposition against like a Microsoft or, do you prefer an API versus like an out of the box solution? And so I think probably very important since you're just starting to hire people to spend calories in the right places, right? So that's great. And then of course there's the product differentiators too that kind of come after you qualify against a lot of the kind of disposition and the philosophical views of the world. So that's
Totally.
awesome. I'm super excited for you. I'll be rooting for you. I'm a customer of Claude, not enterprise,
Amazing.
obviously,
Thank you.
because I'm not an enterprise, but I know a
Not
lot of
yet.
enterprise orgs. So, like hopefully maybe I could make some interesting introductions, but even if not, you're going to do just fine. I know it. Um,
We'll get Lenny
awesome.
on
Well,
board soon.
yeah, Lenny Bloom. He's now at JP Morgan. So,
Oh, is that
a
right?
little bit of a different flavor than media,
That's
but
true for sure.
we gotta get him on board. Who knows? Maybe he's already starting that process. Um, cool. Well, Ryan, this has been amazing. Thanks for spending your valuable time with me. I'm so like lucky, grateful. We're still friends. And yeah, I know a lot of founders are going to get a ton of value from this as well. So appreciate you taking the time on a Friday evening.
Of course, man. Thanks for the opportunity. Anything for the goat and someone who taught me the rules of the trade. I appreciate it.
Appreciate that, man. All right. Thanks, Lister.